Welcome to this deep dive explainer. Today, we're unpacking a terrifying supernatural phenomenon based on a deeply chilling account. We're going to break down the literal anatomy of a curse. Okay, let's just dive right into this, because we're looking at a very specific, highly insidious type of haunting. We're talking about one that doesn't just, go bump in the night, but actively weaponizes your own mind against you. We're exploring exactly how nightmares can be used to trap the living.
Think about this for a second. What if you woke up from a totally terrifying nightmare, only to realize that you are actually still asleep? It's a classic fear, right? But in the case study we're examining today, it becomes a literal, suffocating reality for a woman named Amita. Through the breakdown we've got prepared, we're going to see exactly how the mind becomes a prison and how the actual architecture of a haunting is built from the inside out.
All right, Section 1, the cursed dream house. This is stage 1 of the trap, the lure. So Amita and her husband Eilish lived a pretty modern life. They ran an online business, which meant they could work from anywhere. Because of that, they chased their ultimate dream and bought this idyllic, old yellow house surrounded by forests and gorgeous flowers in a remote village in Himachal. But I want you to imagine opening the door to your beautiful new home on a bright sunny day and immediately being hit by the pungent, visceral stench of rotting meat. The source notes the house had been closed for years, so they initially just brushed it off. They figured, it's just stale air and grime. They lit some candles, turned on the power, and started cleaning. But that sensory detail, that unmistakable smell of death, that was actually the very first sign the house was infected. And that infection, it ran deep. That very first night, when Amita went to chop up some fresh vegetables for dinner, she found them completely rotten from the inside out. They were literally swarming with black bugs. Just awful, right? So they ended up eating just bread and butter and calling it a night. But the entity haunting this house wasn't just hiding in the walls. It was actively corrupting their basic sustenance, perfectly setting the stage to weaken their physical reality.
Moving on to Section 2, the illusion of reality and dream. This is where the entity starts blurring the lines. Once the victims are physically inside and mentally weakened, the entity kicks off stage 2 of the trap, and the escalation here is incredibly rapid and completely disjointed. Let's look at the timeline. At 4:30 a.m. on that first night, Amita finds Eilish outside, digging a deep hole with a spade. He's wearing this bizarre smile, completely in a trance. Later on, we see sequences hitting at 3 a.m., where Amita discovers a hidden basement full of rotting herbs, sees Eilish staring at a black bottle, and then a dark, ghostly woman attacks her. Finally, morning comes, but you can see that the timeline of reality is already completely fracturing.
So the really crucial point here is exactly how this entity bridges the dream world and the physical world. In one terrifying instance, Amita faints from an attack and dreams that she is the one outside. She's digging like a maniac in the dark. Her nails are breaking. Blood is literally flowing from her fingers. She snaps awake in her bed, totally relieved, thinking it was just a bad dream. But then she looks down. Her hands are actually covered in real dirt and dried red blood. And outside, Eilish is crying, filling in the exact same holes she just dreamed about. The psychological dread of this unreliable reality is firmly taking root now. The nightmare scenarios Amita goes through are just brutal. We're talking the house suddenly smelling of rotting meat again, doors locking all by themselves, light bulbs exploding, and Eilish, seemingly possessed by some rotting man's spirit, actually charging at her with a rusty, blood-stained axe. But then comes the sudden reset. She wakes up, and it's 3 a.m. There are no marks on her hands. Eilish is sleeping peacefully right beside her. Everything is completely normal. This specific, unreliable reality trick forces the victim to question their own sanity, completely dismantling their mental defenses. Which brings us to Section 3, the Piशाccini's terrifying trap. Let's officially diagnose this haunting.
Based on the source text, the entity responsible for all this horror is identified as a Pisciaccini. For those who might not know, a Pisciaccini is a demonic spirit that feeds on a person's life force. But what makes this specific lore so fascinating and honestly so terrifying is her method. She doesn't just outright kill you. No, she traps her victims inside the labyrinth of their own minds. Let's look at exactly how she pulls this off.
All right, here is the Pisciaccini's exact modus operandi. Step 1. Infiltrate the dreams. We saw this early on with Eilish sleepwalking and digging in the yard. Step 2. Blur the line between nightmare and reality. We just analyzed this with the 3 a.m. resets and the real blood on Amita's hands. And finally, Step 3. Trap the consciousness in a coma to slowly, methodically steal their life force. You see, the nightmares aren't just jump scares. They are the actual weapons she uses to lock the door of the victim's mind from the inside.
This all builds up to a climactic attack right in the master bedroom. Amita hears a noise, rushes upstairs, and finds her husband Ailesh literally levitating above the bed. He's convulsing like he's bound by invisible chains. As she rushes over to him, he drops to the floor, but when she checks on him, Ailesh is gone. In his place lies the terrifying dark woman, the Piशाccini herself. The entity reaches up, grabs Amita, and chokes her until she completely loses consciousness for the final time.
So, when morning comes, the doctors in a modern hospital just see a medical reality. They see a woman who has slipped into a coma after a series of seizures. All her reports are completely normal, except for a wildly racing heartbeat. But the nightmare reality, that is entirely different. While her physical body just lies there in a hospital bed, Amita's mind is locked in an endless, suffocating horror with the entity in that dark basement. The trap has officially snapped shut.
Section 4. Freedom from Sleep of Death. Let's talk about breaking the curse.
While Amita is stuck in the hospital, Ailesh actually returns to the village house in Himachal. Outside, he encounters an old man who delivers a truly chilling warning. This man validates everything Amita experienced. He reveals that the house is cursed and confirms that the Piशाccini traps people in their own dreams to steal their lives. Crucially, though, he explains that the grounds of the house itself are a graveyard. It's filled with the buried corpses of past victims whose lives were stolen while they were trapped in their sleep.
Armed with this massive revelation, Ailesh takes urgent physical and spiritual countermeasures. He immediately vacates the cursed grounds, removing all physical ties to the property, and arranges for a protective puja, a spiritual ritual, specifically for Amita's health. By severing that geographic connection and invoking spiritual protection, he is essentially attempting to break the Pishaccini's invisible Wi-Fi connection, so to speak, to his wife's mind. And, remarkably, it works. After a few days, Amita spontaneously regains consciousness. But what's truly haunting here is her reaction the moment she wakes up. She immediately starts weeping. And it's not just from the pure terror she endured, but from the profound, crushing isolation of the nightmare trap. The true horror wasn't just the dark woman or the rotting meat. It was the absolute, utter loneliness of being entirely trapped alone in a dream world with literally no way to call for help. There's one final twist. Ailesh later realizes that the old man who warned him outside the house vanished into thin air. This heavily implies that the old man himself was likely one of the trapped ghosts of the property, trying to save others from his own terrible fate. We've broken down exactly how this supernatural trap works, from the very first lure to the coma. But I want to leave you with this final thought. If you were trapped in your own dream house, locked inside your own mind while your body slept, what would you do? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Until next time, stay curious and maybe double check your locks before you go to sleep tonight.